Well, hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of the Auditory Brain Stimulation Therapy Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. I'm also co-founder and creative director of BrainShiftRadio.com. In this video, I want to talk about the basics of drumming for the brain. What does it mean when we're drumming and what does it do to the brain? And I'm going to look at two aspects of what goes on in the nervous system. One is this concept of entrainment, the concept that we can influence the brainwave activity through the drumming. And another one has to do with activation, stimulation of the brain. What kind of drumming do we do when we're doing that? The basic concept here with entrainment is a really simple process of synchronizing the brain with the tempo of the drumming. So in other words, whatever speed I'm playing as my tempo in the drum is going to be what the brain is going to synchronize to. So if I'm playing at a very slow tempo, say a traditional tempo of 4 beats per second, which is like this, after enough time, my brain will oscillate at the same rate. My brain waves will entrain, will synchronize with that 4 beat per second rhythm. And that will bring me into a state of consciousness called theta. And it would actually be the lowest end of theta at around 4 beats per second. Now, brainwave states are referred to in hertz, and that's a cycle per second. So theta state of consciousness, for instance, exists between about 4 hertz and around 8 hertz. And that's 4 beats per second to 8 beats per second. The next level is alpha, exists from about 8 beats per second to around 12, 13 beats per second, or hertz. These are the two ranges that we're going to be looking at for drumming therapeutically. As a matter of fact, all traditional techniques stay mostly in this theta state of consciousness, anywhere from 4 hertz to 8 hertz. And again, 4 hertz is about here. 8 hertz is about here. So that's the range that you're going to find with most therapeutic drumming. Now, there's some rules that you have to follow if you want to influence the brain, depending on the tempo. And there's actually a download I have available that I'll make available on this page that shows how this works. Because as you go through different levels of tempo, you need to have different levels of variability or complexity in the rhythm. Because the brain, in order to entrain, has to have certain conditions met. And these conditions, as far as the drumming go, have to do with complexity and simplicity. So for instance, if I'm playing at the low end of theta, this slow tempo, I can play a really steady rhythm, something that doesn't have any variability at all, like what I just played for you. The brain will synchronize that without any problem. If I take that same rhythm and speed it up to 8 beats per second like I just did a minute ago, and I'll play that for you, the entrainment won't happen. And I'm going to play for a minute, and you're going to get a sense as to why that's the case. And then I'll explain really what's going on here. So this is 8 beats per second played with a steady rhythm, like I played at 4 beats per second. Just kind of settle in and just let yourself kind of experience what it feels like. I'm going to play for maybe a minute or so, and I'll have some predictions about how you're going to respond to this. So here we go. Now, I'm willing to bet that was kind of uncomfortable. It wasn't calming, that's for sure. And when we talk about calming, if you've watched any of my other videos where I'm talking about how I calm with drumming, and I talk about playing at 8 beats per second, and then I play, it feels pretty calming, but this I'm sure didn't. And the reason it didn't, because it was repetitive. Your brain figured out what the pattern was right away, and it tried to shut it out. It couldn't, so it became annoying. There's nowhere to entrain at that point because your brain isn't interested in engaging something that's so predictable. At 4 beats per second it can, and the reason for that is at 4 beats per second our awareness goes internal. Theta is an internally directed state. Like I said, that exists between about 4 and 8 beats per second. And the slower we go, the deeper we go into the theta state of consciousness, the more distance there is from our awareness and the world around us. So we become increasingly disconnected from our outer world as the tempo slows down, as we get deeper into theta. And then, of course, once we get out of theta into the lower state of consciousness of delta, we're actually either in deep sleep or unconscious. So it's a continuum. And the really thing to keep in mind here with all of consciousness is a continuum, that there are shades of gray all the way across. So as you're down in the 4 beat per second pulse, you're internally directed, but you still have some awareness. You have some ability to direct your thought processes at that point. If you go much slower, now you're into unconsciousness and you don't have the ability to consciously direct your thoughts. Traditional cultures that have used drumming to help with meditation, or shamanic cultures that have used drumming to help with their journeys, which are visualizations, which are again meditations, they're using this low end of theta, 4 beats per second, in order to have some influence on their visual experiences. And the belief here is that once you're in this other realm and you're directing the narrative of what you're experiencing, it can have an impact beyond you. So at 4 beats per second, like I said, I can play a really steady rhythm like this. Let me play this for a minute. As I play this, allow yourself to just sit, maybe close your eyes and breathe a minute and just see how this feels for you. It feels very different than that steady pulse at 8 beats per second. So I'm going to play, just settle in and see what kind of experience you have. I'm willing to bet that that felt more peaceful than the double tempo of the 8 beats per second. And the reason for that is because you're able to settle in. Your brain starts shifting into this internally directed state where there's a lot of openness. And now you become somewhat disconnected from the rhythm a bit, because now you're experiencing what your brain does when it's in this very deep internal state. So that's the low end. I can play a very steady rhythm. I speed it up a little bit, and I have to change the rhythm a little bit as well. So let's speed it up. I'm going to play 5.5 beats per second, and I'm going to now play a slightly variable rhythm. So I'll take a rhythm that's a pattern, and I'll just probably keep playing that pattern. I won't make a lot of changes to it as I'm playing. So I can take almost any pattern. Let me take what I consider one of the most common drumming rhythms in the world. It's a 3-3-2 rhythm. It's also called a mambo. I'll play it. You'll recognize this pattern. It's part of so many different songs that you could put almost any melodic or harmonic form around it and make it work and be familiar to you. So here's a 3-3-2 rhythm, otherwise known as a mambo. That's variable enough at that tempo. You want it to have not quite the repetitive nature of the 4 beat per second where it's constant bump, 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 bump. This creates a rhythm, kind of creates a flow, but it doesn't change. You can do that at this tempo. This is very comforting. Speed it up a little bit more. I'll take that same rhythm, that 3-3-2 rhythm, the mambo, and as I play it a little bit faster, now I need to start changing the rhythm a little bit, start creating some variations. Not too many, just a little bit to kind of keep it engaging, otherwise the brain will start shutting down on it. So I'm going to play around 6.5, 7 beats per second, and you'll notice some changes. I'll play a basic rhythm and I'll kind of go into variability and create a kind of a composition around this. So it goes like this. I kept it pretty simple. I played basically 2-bar patterns. The idea here was that you create some musicality around it. When we listen to music, we're used to hearing things in phrasing, 2, 4, 8, 16 bars. I try to do that when I'm playing for people. I try to play things that fit the musical phrasing that you'd be expecting. 2-bar pattern is a pretty short pattern, but it's long enough to be able to create a slight variation, basically. So basically I played the basic rhythm, and then I did little fills, little changes every 4 times through that, and that equaled 2 bars. But if I speed it up a little bit more, now I need to add more variability and more unpredictability. So say I bring it up to 7.5 beats per second or so, play the same rhythm, and I'll show you how at that point I have to do a little bit more in changes. So I'll take the basic rhythm and I will actually change that up and not just play it 3 times with a different fill kind of thing. It goes like this. So at that point, you heard the theme, the basic pattern, but then I changed it up quite a bit. As a matter of fact, there was times when it didn't exist for a little while as I did other things. That's what happens as we speed up. In order to keep the brain engaged, faster tempo, more variability, basically, more complexity. If I get up into 8 beats per second or more, now I need to start changing it even more and take away some of the predictability altogether. Because predictability means that the brain has deciphered the pattern and now wants to shut down. One key aspect of entrainment is that you have enough unpredictability and variability to keep the brain engaged, but not so much to throw it off and pull it out of its entrainment mechanism. So slow tempos, very repetitive, medium tempos, a theme with variations, fast tempos, constantly changing so that it can't be predictable at all. So 8.5, 9 beats per second, I might do something like this. I'll start with that basic mambo pattern, but you'll see it disappears pretty quickly. So that basically 8.5, 9 beats per second, I was changing it a lot. Now all of a sudden it doesn't really have as much musical form as much as it's just constantly moving and evolving. So as I'm doing brain shift radio at higher tempos, or I'm doing REI, which is all at 8 beats per second, I'm taking these rhythms and I'm making them as unpredictable as possible so that the brain stays engaged and doesn't train. Now there's another aspect to this, and that is the specificity of the rhythms, having to do with stimulation. Now there's two aspects of stimulation. One is just creating enough tension in your unpredictability that one pattern may be more engaging and stimulating than another. So I'll show you an example. I'll play an 8 beat per second pattern that has some musicality to it still, that you'll hear some themes and variations. And then I'll play one that has more unpredictability and is more stimulating just because you really can't tell what's going to happen next. And at that point as well, the rhythms are in an odd meter. Most rhythms that we play in regular music are in 4/4 time, can be counted 1 E enda, 2 E enda, 3 E enda, 4 E enda, or they might be in 12/8, 1 ta ta, 2 ta ta, 3 ta ta, 4 ta ta. Those are the two basic feels we're going to get, and you're basically looking at a duple feel, which is the 1 E enda, 2 E enda, 3 E enda, 4 E enda, or you've got the triple feel, which is 1 ta ta, 2 ta ta, 3 ta ta, 4 ta ta. But you've got this regularity to it. You get into odd meter and all of a sudden there's no regularity necessarily. You've got groups of 2s and 3s blended together. So it might be 1 2 1 2 3, 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, 1 2 1 2 3, 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, or something even more unusual than that. And you'll hear that in when I play here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take an 8 beat per second pattern. I'm going to start with the mambo again. I'm going to create a theme and variations, tension and release. And I'll play for a little bit. You can see how it follows the pattern. You're going to hear that 3-3-2 coming through fairly regularly. So it'll sound like this. So you could still hear that mambo pattern in there, just put in amongst a bunch of other things, but you kept coming back to that theme. That's what I mean by having kind of a low level of stimulation. Enough unpredictability that we can get the entrainment happening, but not so much stimulation that we're activating the brain in the way that we would with REI or something. Now I'll play a rhythm that has much more variability, the same tempo. I'm going to start off in an odd meter. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start off in this example I gave a minute ago of 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, because it's a really nice pattern. It's very simple. So that sounds like this. Not much difference in tempo. I did speed up a little bit, but you'll notice they were very different in the intensity of how it felt. Your brain became more engaged on the second one because there's less predictability. As well, the rhythms are unusual enough that you can't really put them in the musical context that we're used to. You couldn't tap your foot to it and feel the 4/4, whereas the one before that, where I was playing the mambo, for the most part, you probably could, although I did throw in some odd meter once in a while just because that's what I do, but it wasn't necessary. So you could listen to that and kind of feel the pulse of it. This last one you couldn't really feel the pulse of because it felt like it was always out of sync, always out of time. Your brain will still entrain to it because it's hearing the underlying pattern. That's what the brain is responding to on an entrainment level. On an activization level, it's responding based upon the accents and the orchestration. So that's the basic idea here. So with drumming and the brain, Really simple. If you want to entrain the brain, you set your tempo and you get your drumming at the tempo you want the brain to go to. So if you want the brain in the mid theta at 6 beats per second, you play at that tempo. The brain will synchronize. The trick here is that in order to do entrainment, you have to have different levels of variability depending on what speed you're at. The lowest end, 4 beats per second or below, really regular patterns work for most people. Get into the middle, you want some variability, but predictable variability, something that feels musical, that is not jarring. You get to the higher levels, you need complexity, and you need an unpredictable quality that keeps the brain engaged. When we're in alpha state of consciousness, especially mid-alpha, 9, 10, 11 beats per second, we need to have enough activation to keep the brain going. And that basically means an unpredictability that the brain is unable to decipher what's happening, and it's that novelty which allows the brain to keep trying to work on finding the pattern. So that's the basics with drumming in the brain. Again, we have different tempos and different complexities depending on what we're trying to do. So definitely check out my other videos where I talk about the different tempos, show you examples of what it means to be in mid-theta and what you can do with that with regards to creativity and intuition. Low theta with meditation. Try my active brain meditation. You can see just how that feels as you're listening to tempos of that really slow level to get into the deep theta. Check out BrainShift Radio and the REI CDs to see how the faster tempos can work. Now, BrainShift Radio is really cool in that I have covered the whole spectrum, all the way down to deep meditation up to the fastest level of alpha, 12 beats per second or so. So if you're interested in what these different tempos and different complexities mean in the real world, try a free trial of BrainShift Radio, because that'll give you a real good feel for what all the variables are in this. So hope to see you in the next video. Until then, I'm going to play a little bit here, kind of settle you down into a nice place of calm.